Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're venturing into, well, a really fascinating and maybe slightly unsettling area, AI afterlives. I mean, you think about these incredible jumps in generative AI, the powerful language models like GPT-4, these generative agents. They're making it possible, like right now, to create digital copies of people that are starting to seem really believable.
It really does feel like we're on the edge of something major. The ability to generate text, audio, even video that can convincingly mimic someone. It opens up some, well, extraordinary
Yeah.
possibilities. And as we'll get into, some pretty profound questions, too.
Absolutely. And look, this isn't just theory, right? We're seeing the first steps already happening. So our goal today is to really dig deep, explore the potential upsides, and maybe more importantly, the big worries that come with building and using these AI afterlives.
Right.
We pulled together quite a bit, research papers, real-world examples to sort of help us navigate this. And, it's worth remembering, isn't it? Humanity has always wanted ways to stay connected to people we've lost.
That's such a key point.
Simple things like gravestones or obituaries becoming common after the Civil War.
Yeah.
Even those early attempts, using new tech to try and contact the dead, this drive, it runs deep.
It really does. That basic human need to remember, to connect. It's older than any technology. And now, fast forward, to the digital age, we saw online memorial pages pop up. Even things like the virtual memorial garden that was decades ago. And now AI is stepping into this space and it's getting, well, much more sophisticated.
Yeah.
We've seen the AI recreation of John Lennon for that Beatles track.
Right.
The Lou Reed chatbot that generates lyrics kind of like him. And that really impactful use of AI for the voices of gun violence victims.
Those examples really hit home, don't they? They show the growing power, the emotional weight these AI representations can have.
Yeah.
And now you've got startups like Rememory hereafter. They're specifically trying to create these personalized AI afterlife using data gathered before someone dies.
Which is a really different approach.
It is. And then you see developments like in China with digital immortality services or South Korea using VR so people can interact with deceased loved ones.
Yeah.
That story of the mother with the VR version of her daughter, it's incredibly comforting.
Incredibly powerful, yeah. And it's interesting, like you said, to contrast those approaches where the user or the person themselves drives it with the post-mortem stuff. Like character.ai letting you chat with, I don't know, a simulation of Einstein or that museum's Van Gogh chatbot.
Exactly. So, okay, with all that going on, our deep dive today is really focused. Let's thoroughly explore both sides. The potential benefits, yes, but also the very real concerns around creating and using AI afterlives.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's maybe start with the potential benefits. What are some of the key upsides you're seeing?
Well, I think one of the biggest potential benefits is around emotional support for people who are grieving.
Yeah.
Imagine being able to interact with what some are calling a generative ghost, basically an AI that can access memories and even create new content like text or maybe even voice in the style of the person who's passed away.
A generative ghost.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. It could potentially be a really powerful way to foster what researchers call continuing bonds.
So it's not just looking at old photos or letters. You could actually sort of interact.
Kind of, yeah.
It still sounds a bit like science fiction, but I can see how that might offer comfort, a feeling of connection for some people. I know some research on online memorials suggests that maintaining those kinds of bonds can actually help with grief, with making sense of the loss.
Exactly. It could provide perhaps a sense of immediate comfort for certain individuals.
Yep.
But of course, the long-term psychological effects, that's a big unknown.
Right.
Interacting with an AI that responds, compared to how we usually remember people, like one-sided conversations,
Yeah.
we just don't know the full impact yet.
True.
But think beyond the immediate grief period. Think about future life events.
Being able in some way to share a big moment, a wedding, a grandchild being born with a generative ghost, maybe even getting advice or commentary that feels like them, that could be incredibly meaningful for some.
Yeah, I could see that. It taps into that feeling, doesn't it? Oh, I wish Dad could see this, or what would Mom say?
Precisely. That idea that an AI could somehow address that longing, it's compelling. And you mentioned earlier people talking to the deceased like at a graveside. We often imagine their response, right? So could a generative ghost just be a high-tech version of that very human thing?
It's an interesting thought. But like you said, the key difference is it talks back.
Exactly.
We definitely need to keep the psychological impact front and center there.
Yeah.
Now, you also mentioned practical benefits. What sort of practical things are we talking about?
Yeah, this might be less obvious, but could be super valuable. These generative ghosts could potentially hold really important end-of-life planning info.
Huh?
Think about details for the funeral, maybe financial account numbers, passwords where important documents are kept. Imagine the stress after someone dies.
Absolutely. It's chaos sometimes.
Right. So having easy access to that kind of information, maybe through a familiar voice or interface, that could be a huge relief.
That's actually a really good point. I hadn't thought of that quite that way. Or imagine asking the ghost, how did grandma make her lasagna?
Yeah.
Or how did dad fix that leaky faucet? That kind of practical help feeling personal.
Yeah,
Yeah, that could be really useful.
exactly that. Or home repair guidance, like you said. And then thinking even longer term, there's even the idea that these ghosts could potentially generate income.
Really? How?
Well, say the deceased was an artist or a writer or a musician with the right permissions, licensing, all that.
Mm.
Their AI could maybe continue creating things in their style.
Yeah.
And that could potentially provide some ongoing financial support for the family left behind.
Okay, so we've got potential emotional support, practical help, maybe even financial aspects. These are pretty compelling upsides.
They are.
But now, okay, let's flip the coin. What are the big concerns, the worries we need to be really aware of?
Right, because there are definitely some significant potential downsides.
Where do we start?
I think a critical area is the potential for negative impacts on mental health. While yes, some people might find comfort, others could end up experiencing something called delayed accommodation of loss,
Delayed accommodation.
meaning it hinders or slows down their acceptance of the reality that their loved one has actually died. That ongoing interaction with a simulation, even a comforting one, might just get in the way of integrating the loss and, moving forward.
That makes a lot of sense. If you keep engaging with this digital version, it might make it harder to really grasp that the person is gone and to start figuring out life without them.
Mm-hmm.
And what about the design? Could the way these things are built make those risks worse?
Oh, absolutely. Just the fact they're interactive could be tricky. Imagine like a generative ghost sending you push notifications. Right. It might seem small, but it could chip away at the grieving person's sense of control over their own process. Instead of choosing when to remember, they might feel pushed to engage.
Yeah, like you have to respond.
Exactly. And then there's the risk of relying too much on it. People might start depending too heavily on the AI's advice for big life decisions. That could lead to, information overload, maybe being unable to make choices on their own, or even creating conflict if the AI's advice clashes with what living friends or family are suggesting.
And I guess one of the biggest concerns, the one that jumps out immediately, is people actually starting to believe the AI is the person. You mentioned this earlier.
Yes, the risk of anthropomorphism, attributing real human consciousness, feelings, beliefs to the AI, that's a huge one.
Especially when grieving, maybe.
Definitely. Grief makes us vulnerable. And if the design uses things like metaphors of reincarnation or gives the AI a physical form, like in VR, it could really blur those lines for mourners. That makes complicated grief or that delayed accommodation we talked about much more likely. We just have this natural tendency to see personhood everywhere.
Okay, so those are serious individual risks. What about broader worries, like societal impacts, ethical stuff?
Reputation is a big one. Think about the deceased person's digital legacy.
How so?
Well, a generative ghost, based on whatever data it's trained on and how it works, could potentially figure out and maybe even reveal private information.
Oh.
Things the person never intended to share, maybe a secret aspect of their identity, something from their past.
Wow, yeah.
And you have to remember, what's private or okay today might be seen very differently years down the line. Social norms change.
That's a really crucial point about privacy evolving over time. What else? What other big picture concerns?
Potential for malicious use, that's deeply troubling.
Like how?
Well, imagine someone abusive creating a generative ghost of their deceased partner to continue harassing or manipulating the surviving family.
That's horrific.
It is. Or think about bad actors creating fake ghosts to carry out scams or other illegal stuff online.
Gosh, okay, that's dark. And how might these AI afterlives affect our relationships with, actual living people?
Yeah, on a sociocultural level, they could be pretty disruptive. Because these AI ghosts are modeled on specific people we loved, they might interfere more with existing relationships within families, friend groups, than, say, a generic AI assistant would.
Yeah.
You might see people start preferring to interact with the simulation instead of fully engaging with the living people around them, a kind of substitution effect.
Hmm. And what about the person who died? Do they get any say in whether an AI version of them gets made?
Consent. That is a massive ethical and legal question mark right now.
Right.
Should we be creating these simulations without explicit permission given before death? You could easily see wills in the future needing clauses about this, either forbidding or allowing data use for simulations. And we've already seen real distress caused when AI recreations happen without permission. That whole thing with George Carlin's daughter reacting to that AI comedy spec.
Oh, yeah, that blew up. It felt really wrong to a lot of people.
It absolutely did. It highlights how crucial transparency is,
Yeah.
meaning users have to know clearly and unambiguously that they're talking to an AI, not the actual person. Things like that Polish radio station doing a fake interview with a dead Nobel laureate,
I heard about that.
or reports of AI replicas being used to deliver bad news in some places. That shows the potential for deception if we're not careful.
So, thinking ahead then, what are the essential things we need to get right in terms of design, ethics?
Well, design teams really need to prioritize clear, easy-to-use opt-out options, ways for users to stop interacting with these dead bots, as some call them, that allow for emotional closure, not just cutting off abruptly.
An off-ramp.
Exactly. And we also just need to grapple with the bigger philosophical questions, What does personhood even mean in this context? What about the potential for these digital dead to be used to manipulate us, maybe even just for profit?
Wow. This has been, well, a really thought-provoking and, yeah, sometimes unsettling deep dive into this whole AI afterlife landscape.
Mm-hmm.
It's so clear that, okay, these technologies might offer some real comfort, some new ways to connect,
Sure.
but they also come with this huge list of potential risks to mental health, reputation, our social fabric that we absolutely need to tackle carefully and proactively.
Absolutely. And we need much more research. We need to understand how different people, different cultures experience grief and remembrance, and what the long-term impacts of interacting with these generative ghosts might actually be.
Right. So as AI keeps blurring these lines, the ones between the living and, well, digital representations of the deceased, here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to ponder. What are the fundamental parts of human connection and that really personal journey of grieving that we need to protect most carefully as this technology develops? It's definitely something worth thinking about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.